Hello, students. Mr. V here. I'm just kind of coming to you today because I'm sure many of you are a little concerned, worried, confused about what happened last week while we were away from school. So, what I'm going to attempt to do here is break down what happened on January 6th before, during, and after so that you have a better understanding of kind of where we're at. Bottom line is January 6th is a day that will always go down in history, and it's not because we were virtually remote teaching that day. Weirdly enough, I will always remember that I was teaching AP US history on a remote day, talking to students about current events when all this kind of unfolded. Sadly, with the current division inside the United States and the rhetoric that people have been utilizing over the past few years, I can't say I'm surprised at the crazy antics of people who, quite honestly, are just ill informed about how the system works. If anything, January 6th taught us that we have to have better civics education. And quite honestly, folks, if my generation and my parents' generation have given you this America, then I'm really hoping that your generation can do better. Because January 6th was a really dark day in our history, just because of all of the obviously actions of that day, because people did die. It was a attempted overthrow of the government. I know people will argue on that point, but quite honestly, it was an attempted coup, and that is a forceful takeover of the government. There were people in that crowd that were planning on seizing government officials and kidnapping them or hurting them. And again, there are people that died during this whole debacle. So it's really important that we understand what happened, so that when our emotions and our fear kind of get to a very high level, we learn to kind of corral them and understand them, so that we can have a better understanding of where we are as a country moving forward. That being said, let's kind of go over what happened. Now, prior to this, in a simpler time, okay, and I'll move myself out of the way here. During the buildup to this event, there was a contested election from November, as you all know. The contested election was between Joe Biden, the Democrat, and Donald Trump, the incumbent Republican. So Biden and Trump obviously had kind of come to head here, where they had come down to the election cycle. Trump had already kind of floated out the possibility that there was going to be voter irregularities, that there was going to be voter fraud was thrown around, all these different theories about how the election was going to be skewed. And of course, on election night, in many of these states, it looked like Trump was winning, and then it swayed back the other direction. So it played right into that conspiracy theory. Now, the thing about conspiracy theories is most of them are a little out of whack and really have no basis in fact. Now, are there some irregularities that maybe states have to look into? Sure, but I want to make sure you understand elections are run by states, individual states. There's no such thing as a national election. So when you went to vote in Ohio, you are voting for your representatives for Ohio, even the presidency. That's what the Electoral College basically is. So not only are you voting on your House members, your senators, your local elected officials, you're also voting for who you want to represent technically, who you want to represent as president from Ohio. So Ohio voted for Donald Trump. Therefore, Donald Trump got the Electoral College votes. The problem is that when Joe Biden won, let's say, Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania had skewed very much in Trump's favor early in the evening on election night, and then through the counting for the rest of the week, when they were counting absentee ballots, provisional ballots, when they were looking through, basically districts that were slow in their count, it started to trend back the other way to where Biden came out by thousands of votes instead of Trump winning. So, of course, when you hear Trump supporters saying stop the steal, what they're really meaning is they wanted the count from election night to be the only count. That's not how it works. The state of Pennsylvania basically had laws in place. Now, Trump's argument through lawyers for, the last few months has been that the rules changed. Now, certainly they can go back and look at that. They can certainly contest that in courts, but that wasn't going to change the outcome of the election, because the rules were the rules on election day. That is how elections are run. You can call it fraud, but it's really not. It's not fraud. You can say, hey, the rules aren't right and fix them in the future, but those were the rules on election day. So what they were basically doing is trying to get a judge to say that the rules shouldn't have counted and thrown them out. It's very similar to what happened to Al Gore back in 2000 when there was a what is known as a butterfly ballot down in Florida that kind of skewed the election towards George W. Bush in Florida, and by extension kicked the election to George W. Bush as president because Florida was the swing state in 2000. Gore went to court trying to say that not only should the count be redone, but that certain ballots should be thrown out. Those were thrown out of court. The court system is not designed to sway elections. They try and take a high road on that. And you even saw that in the Supreme Court, where 3 Trump appointees also kind of, were part of that discussion. And they basically said, we're not even going to take the case. So do realize most of the time the court doesn't want to have anything to do with elections. So needless to say, we had already this environment of contested elections, and we had disinformation out there put out by the news media, basically kind of playing into Trump's hand. Now, Trump, of course, had played it up through his Twitter account. He had used YouTube videos. He had used a number of ways to get out his claims, but his claims were not backed up in court. The courts basically threw him out. Even local politicians in places like Michigan and Arizona kind of told him, your arguments are not valid. So bottom line is, the Electoral College certification fight was on from that point, where they were trying to decertify these election returns. The court fight didn't work out, and the last-ditch effort, we thought, was Louis Gohmert, the weird-looking dude on the top there, a representative from Texas, who is a Republican, literally sued the vice president, Mike Pence. He sued Mike Pence, basically saying that Mike Pence has the ability, as the leader of the Senate, when the Electoral College votes come in, to basically just disallow it and just, kick him out. Mike Pence read the Constitution. He obviously understood what his role was. And late Tuesday night, he basically, after all the courts had kind of dismissed Gohmert's claims, Pence said, my job is not to do that. My job is to report the votes, and that's it. And Pence is right. That is his job. So then we had 2 senators by the name of Josh Hawley from Missouri and Ted Cruz from Texas both stand up and say they were going to contest the election returns, along with House members. Now, basically what that means is, when on Wednesday they started to report out the Electoral College votes, and I don't know how many of you guys watched it, it is like watching paint dry, because it's really supposed to be kind of a formula and very kind of just... it's just kind of theater. That's all it is. It's not really anything where if you contest it, it's going to overturn the election. The problem was when Hawley and Cruz kind of told their supporters that, hey, we're going to contest it, they kind of made it seem like they were going to overturn the election in the Senate and Trump would be president. That was never going to happen. As I told students, this was a Hail Mary from the 1-yard line that had no chance of ever working. So bottom line is, the Hawley-Cruz effort wasn't going to work, but the supporters believed it would. And that's going to play into our discussion here later. We kind of got a sneak peek of how contentious this was going to be when the Pennsylvania State House met the previous day on Tuesday and refused to seat a Democratic state senator because of election problems. Even though the thing had been certified, they broke out into a shouting match. They deposed the lieutenant governor running the meetings. So I think a lot of people who were Trump supporters looked at that and said, well, that's what we're going to do on Wednesday. So it got a little out of hand, to say the least. Then, of course, on Tuesday, you also had the Georgia runoff. Now, the Georgia runoff was over 2 Senate seats. Now, the senators at the time were David Perdue, the guy to the far left here, and Kelly Loeffler right here. These are the senators from the state of Georgia. Now, what happened in November in the Georgia election is that none of these candidates got 50% of the vote. It was so close that nobody got above 50% because of third-party candidates. So by Georgia law, remember, it's states run the elections. By Georgia law, these guys basically had to go into a runoff face-to-face, one-on-one. So Perdue and Ossoff had to go against each other. Ossoff, the Democratic challenger, and Loeffler against Warnock, a reverend from Georgia, who, again, is the Democrat kind of challenging Loeffler. Long story short, in a very close runoff election, both Ossoff and Warnock won, which is historical, number one, because Ossoff is Jewish and Warnock is obviously African American. They are the first two Jewish and African American senators coming from the South. So that's, kind of interesting to say the least. But they're also politically, they're replacing two Republicans in the Senate, which shifts the balance of power now. Now it's a 50-50 tie. Remember, there are 100 senators. There are 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans. Now, because of that tie, that means that the incoming vice president, Kamala Harris, will be the deciding vote, which puts not only the vote in favor of the Democrats, but also the House leadership. Or not the House, I'm sorry, the Senate leadership. So bottom line, what occurs with that is that Mitch McConnell, who's been the majority leader for the Republicans for the past few years, now has to give way to Chuck Schumer from New York, who is now going to be the Democratic majority leader. So now the Democrats control the Senate. They control the House by a very slim margin, and Nancy Pelosi was put back as the Speaker of the House. So you have Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer as the leaders of the House and Senate, respectively. They're both Democrats. Now you have Joe Biden coming into the presidency, also a Democrat. So you have a clean line of Democratic majorities in all facets of the legislative and executive branches, which is concerning if you're a Republican, of course, because now the balance of power has shifted. And possibly that paves the way for Biden to have a very successful term of office, depending upon how he uses it and depending upon how solidly the Democrats stick together on issues. We'll see. That was all kind of the precursor to what happened here. Okay. So what happened the next morning? Well, the next morning, the Trump campaign, which still has been raising money and still has been kind of doing what they need to do to support their guy, they planned what they called and teamed a Save America rally at 10 a.m. right in front of the White House. Now, for those of you that don't know the geography of Washington, D.C., the White House is just down the street. In Washington, D.C., it's just down Pennsylvania Avenue from the Capitol building. So it's a straight shot. Even on Inauguration Day, the president takes the oath of office at the Capitol building and then traditionally walks down Pennsylvania Avenue to go into the White House for the first time as president. Well, Trump gave a speech out in front of the White House at 11 a.m. And during the speech, he basically said, I'm going to lead you down to the Capitol building and we're going to, kind of let them know how we feel and we're going to show them. And the terminology that he was kind of using was we're going to fight. His lawyer, a guy named Rudy Giuliani, who also used to be the mayor of New York years ago, he also gave a speech where he basically said, we'll have trial by combat, which that language stirred up that crowd. And that was, of course, a very contentious, did he say enough to actually blame him for the riot? We'll get to that here in a bit, but it didn't help that a lot of the terminology was very, and I don't want to say violent, but certainly pushing that direction. Well, the rally crowds started to march to the Capitol building. Now, it immediately made Trump a liar because he did not lead them. He stayed at the White House. Okay, so he never actually went. None of the people on the stage actually went with him. These were people just kind of went on their own from this rally all the way down to the Capitol building. Now, to be fair, the people in attendance, not everybody left that rally, went down to the Capitol building. A lot of people went, well, the rally's over. I'm going to get back on the bus or in my car and go home. But there were, of course, thousands of people that marched down to the Capitol building. Now, some people who were at that rally said, hey, I thought we were just marching down to the Capitol to continue our rally out front. But obviously it got carried away after they got there. Now, of course, in the afternoon session, as I mentioned before, this is Ted Cruz to the left and Josh Hawley to the right. They started their attempt to kind of block the results for the Electoral College. And the Senate and the House basically meet and they go in alphabetical order and they say, all right, the Electoral College votes from Alabama have been certified and Alabama went to Trump, so they count it for Trump and Pence as vice president. Now, taking the lead in that session, Mike Pence, the vice president, and Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. They kind of run the show. Pence really does it more ceremonial because he's, the outgoing member of the executive branch that is in the legislative branch for that time. And basically what ends up happening is when they got to Arizona, which is one of the 5 states that really was the crux of the argument about the election returns, you had people say, hey, you know what? Arizona was close, Georgia was close, Michigan was close, Pennsylvania was close, and Wisconsin was close. Well, they were going to challenge the returns, and basically the way to do that is you need at least one member of the House and one member of the Senate to say, "Hey, I want to discuss this. I want to talk about how those electoral college votes were counted. I want to talk about how that state ran that election cycle." Now, of course, when Cruz got up to say, "Hey, I've got problems with this," he does have a House member from Arizona. There was a guy named Paul Gosar who said, "I also challenge it." And he's from Arizona. So, okay, you can kind of see it. He's from Arizona. He wants to make sure that this was counted correctly. At that point, once they have submitted that in writing, they have the right to then break. The House goes and stays in the House chamber, and the Senate goes down to their chamber. And they have a 2 hour time limit, and they're allowed to talk it out, discuss what the problems were, and then vote. Okay, so they were in the process of doing that with the Arizona election cycle. They were in the middle of doing that when the crowd outside stormed in, went across the barricades, and got into the Capitol building. Okay, and so that was kind of at the end of our remote learning day. That was kind of the exclamation point that, hey, surprise, there's something going on in the Capitol. Okay. Now, the rioters, of course, stormed the Capitol, and these were not the best and brightest people. Many of them were really bad individuals. Okay. You had some people that were coming in with Confederate flags. This guy who was carrying a Confederate flag, sorry, he just can't pick a winner because his choice for the presidency lost and the Confederacy lost. This is a loser flag. And I know some of you may have like, well, my family is Southern and whatever else. Here's the problem, folks. I can be a proud, let's say I'm German. I could be very proud, but I can't wave a Nazi flag and say, well, it's part of my heritage. That's my own personal opinion on it. As a historian, it really kind of bothers me that people kind of wave this as pride. Now, of course, if I were down in South Carolina, I might feel very differently. But bottom line is, this guy is not exactly there to show his esteem for the United States if he's carrying that flag, because the even during the Civil War, that flag did not go into the Capitol building. They never captured Washington, D.C. The only time the Capitol building has ever been held by people that were not supposed to be there, it was when the British burned it in 1814 during the War of 1812. So this is a big deal that these people kind of stormed in. And of course, you can see the kind of just strange looking people to the bottom right there. Many of these people have been arrested, and rightfully so. We'll kind of get to that here in a bit. But it does beg the question of, if these guys got into the Capitol building, how'd they get in so easily? Because we've had demonstrations. If you ever go to DC, there's a demonstration all the time. So how in the world did these guys get into the Capitol building? So there are going to be questions about this, because they got in, they stormed offices, they ripped up Nancy Pelosi's office pretty badly, they ripped up Schumer's office, they went into a lot of these offices and like tore stuff up, stole things. They were still stealing things like computers and flash drives, and even the signs off the door. Some dude walked out with a podium from Nancy Pelosi's office. This is why the Capitol Police, as well as the FBI, are trying to catch these people. And there is actually a website where you can tip off and say, hey, this person was in the Capitol building. But it wasn't that hard for that, because a lot of these guys actually posted on their Facebook and their Twitter and stuff. So it's really not that hard, including, people that were actually, like, there was a dude that was a newly elected member of the West Virginia House. So he was going to be a state representative in West Virginia, who filmed himself doing this, filmed himself going into the Capitol building. And of course, some of you may have seen the video of the lady walking out crying, saying she got maced and everything. You walked into a government office, you walked into, yes, they were screaming, it's the people's house, but there are tours. You can go into the Capitol building as a guest. Absolutely. You can go visit, talk to your congressman. They'll schedule a tour for you. These guys stormed in, and they had ill intent when they walked in. So I'm not going to weep for these people that they got sprayed with mace. It probably should have been and could have been a lot worse for these people. Now, that's not to kind of downplay it, because there was a Capitol Police officer that was killed in the melee. He was hit by a fire extinguisher in the head, had a stroke, and later died. There was a woman who was shot by a Capitol Police officer. She was kind of a far right-wing person who was there. Now, they were saying, oh, she wasn't doing anything. Well, you are part of this mob, and just because somebody else is trying to break down a door, you get caught in the crossfire. Holding them liable for that's going to be a little tough. So I mean, it's kind of an ugly situation all the way around. Now, of course, it begged the question: where were the Capitol Police? What were they doing? Why weren't they prepared? The leader of the Capitol Police Department actually has stepped down. There were calls for his resignation, and he stepped down. And there's going to be a massive internal investigation over this, because there were a lot of people that said, well, wait a minute, how is it that some entrances there were Capitol Police officers, in riot gear, like pushing them back and making sure they didn't go any farther. But there were also YouTube videos of like them helping them, hey, let me help you get across the barricade, and hey, come right on in. And there's going to be a massive investigation of the Capitol Hill Police, because, that doesn't look good, especially when during other protest movements you had, riot gear at the ready, you had barricades up, you made it very clear that if you came on the government property that you were going to get arrested or worse. So again, why was this so easy? There's going to be a lot of investigation moving forward. Now, of course, a lot of these guys are getting arrested as well. We'll get to that. Now, were the House and the Senate in any danger? Yes, they were. One of the common themes on social media was, well, now you know what it's like to be in a active shooter drill at a school, because they had that. I mean, they were crouched, behind desks. They were, kind of removed to a safe location. This was a legitimate threat. Many of these people that came into the Capitol building were armed. This was a standoff, and there was an actual standoff at the House of Representative doors. But after they got the House and the Senate members to the safe locations, they kind of eased back from the doors, and some of these people did get into the House chamber. They did get into the Senate chamber. And folks, that is trespassing. These people, it's a federal offense. These people are going to jail. They are going to jail for doing this. Now, has this ever happened before? Yes, there's been violence in the Capitol building. Sometimes even because of actual sitting senators and congressmen. If you study the Civil War, right before the Civil War, Charles Sumner was caned, hit over the head by a cane, and basically disabled for life by a House member who disagreed with his speech from the previous day on slavery, and more importantly, some of the people from the South that were slave owners. Preston Brooks walked in and beat the heck out of Charles Sumner. That's probably the most known violent action in the House of Representatives, but in the Senate for that matter. But there have been other cases. There have been anarchists that got in. Most recently, 1954, there were some people who basically were upset with the treatment of Puerto Rico that got in and actually got some shots off. There has been violence, but not on this scale. And like I said, the last time it was invaded like this, it was 1814. Now, order was finally restored after hours. These rioters were able to gain access and stay there for quite some time. But it was not without controversy, because, of course, one of the main things that you can do as President of the United States is call in the National Guard. It took a while. And here's the thing. The National Guard does take a while to get mobilized after they're given the okay, but the okay was even delayed. And there are questions as to who called it. It depends on what news source you listen to. Donald Trump, in his speech later on, basically said, hey, the first thing I did was I called in the National Guard. That has been called into question. There are people saying that Mike Pence might have done that in conjunction with Kamala Harris to try and quell things. Joe Biden went on TV to, basically tell Donald Trump he needs to get on TV right now and quell this. And Trump released a video, but it wasn't really, it wasn't like him going on television and telling his supporters, stop. He kind of said, hey, look, we love you, but you need to go home. That's very controversial, because we love you. They're rioters. These are guys that are breaking the law. They are committing basically treason, for lack of better terminology. If nothing else, sedition, which is speaking out against your government in a forceful fashion, and basically, kind of going against the inner workings of government. So bottom line, this was not without controversy. The DC police finally kind of stepped in and dispersed the rioters, but it was a few hours before there was actually kind of a calming down of the tension in the Capitol area. Congress later on resumed their Electoral College count. And of course, as soon as Congress did that, in the early morning hours of January 7th, Biden was certified the winner finally. So that meant that, 13 days later, Biden will be president of the United States. He will take the oath of office. Now, what is the fallout? The fallout is going to be up to these people right here. This is Charles Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, the new majority leader of the Senate and the Speaker of the House. They are both Democrats, like I said before. They are going to be the ones kind of making the decision, because there are questions. Where was Trump? Because while this was going on, he was basically sitting in the Oval Office watching it on television. And even though aides were kind of saying, hey, you need to do something, you need to go on TV, you need to disperse the crowd, you need to get on your Twitter, you need to do something, he was very slow in reacting. Now, he claims he was very fast, and maybe he was, and we're not getting the correct step-by-step process of what happened that day. That will come with the investigation. But bottom line is, there was a lot of people saying, hey, you really didn't do enough. Now, is he responsible for the riot? Again, did he say, we're going to go down and we're going to capture congressmen and senators and we're going to burn the place down? No. But did he say, hey, I'm going to walk down there with you and we're going to show them how, strength is? He said terminology that could be interpreted that way. Now, is that protected speech? Is that is that his right? That's something that's going to be decided later on. But there are questions now. What about the police? Like I said, we're going to have an investigation. What's going to happen to the rioters? A lot of these guys have been arrested. There was a guy that walked into Nancy Pelosi's office, sat down, put his feet up. He's been arrested. There's been a guy that, like I said, stole a podium. He's been arrested too. The weird dude with the buffalo hat and he's been arrested as well. Like these are people. And now, of course, if you watch the news on January 6th and into the 7th, there were a lot of people saying, oh, it had to be infiltrators. It had to be Antifa. It had to be people that were not part of, this rally. These guys are known Trump supporters. These guys are, kind of the hardcore, and in many cases, alt-right. These are guys that are, maybe white supremacists or, part of militia groups or whatever else. These are kind of guys that are extreme in their viewpoints, and they're very pro-Trump. So for the Trump folks to say, hey, we didn't have anything to do with it and it's not our followers, it's definitely proven to be, as these guys are being apprehended. And many of them were known to have kind of extremist viewpoints. Now, this then brought into question, if you invite these people to the Capitol building and you really whip them up into, a riotous mood, and they go down and start a riot and you don't do anything, what then can happen? Well, you've heard things like the 25th Amendment. Now, the 25th Amendment is the line of secession. It's the idea that if the president is removed, who takes over? But another part of the 25th Amendment is, what happens if the president doesn't know he can't do something? Now, again, this was put in place very recently. The 25th Amendment was put in place in the 1960s, and it basically germinated from the Kennedy assassination because LBJ took over. Lyndon Baines Johnson took over as president of the United States, and Lyndon Baines Johnson basically had heart problems. And there were questions of, like, what happens if LBJ dies? What happens if he has a heart attack and doesn't die but is in the hospital? So they put into the 25th Amendment a clause that basically says that if the vice president looks at the situation and says this president cannot fulfill the role of the presidency, he can go to the cabinet, okay, which is the group of advisors, the people that are Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Defense. He can pull them all together, and if he gets half of them at least to say, yep, we think the president cannot do the job, they can sign off on a letter, send it to Schumer. Actually, not Schumer, I'm sorry, it'd be Chuck Grassley, the president pro tempore of the Senate, who's a Republican, and Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. They send this letter basically saying, we don't think the president can fulfill the duties of president. Now, again, this was put in place for, president has a stroke and can't do the job. President has a heart attack. But what happens if the president has kind of lost his mind? What if he is not capable of filling the job because he's, not really with it? This gets harder to do. So Pence basically was asked, hey, would you do this? And there have been people saying in the White House circles that he has been considering this. But basically what it would need to be is he'd have to go to the cabinet. Well, the cabinet, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of the cabinet members have started to resign. So it's getting harder and harder to find cabinet members because Secretary of Education DeVos, Secretary of Transportation Chao, they're out. They tendered their resignation because of the riots. So you have a much smaller pool of people to choose from. So it'd probably be easier to convene the cabinet at this point because there's less people, but it may be harder to get kind of half because maybe the hardline Trump supporters are still in the cabinet. So Mike Pence has kind of been a little lax to do this because, again, we only have at this point tomorrow, the 11th, we only have 9 more days of the presidency. So maybe Pence is saying, hey, let's just ride this out and not worry about it. So Pence has been very kind of slow on the uptake when it comes to this. He doesn't really want to do it. At least that's what it seems. Now, even if they send a letter to Grassley and Pelosi, Trump could put in a letter appealing that, saying, no, wait, I am within my rights to continue the presidency, in which case he would revert back to being president. What would then have to happen was Pence would have to do this again and say, no, seriously, he can't do it, and would have to be accepted by Congress. Congress would then immediately have to come back into session within 48 hours, and they would have 21 days to act on this. But during that time period, Mike Pence would still act as president. It looks like Pence really doesn't want to go through all this. So the House and the Senate have now kind of taken matters in their own hands. The House tomorrow will most likely put into place articles of impeachment again. Now, if you remember, Donald Trump has been the third president to be impeached. Impeached only means that he has been officially brought up on charges. He has been officially accused of a crime. Now, that was back because of the possible collusion with Russia. That was, obstruction of justice and things pertaining to the election and to some meddling here and there. He was found not guilty by the Senate. Okay, so he was not removed from office. Okay. What happens now is they are basically going to charge him, it looks like, with inciting an insurrection, that he was part of this mob. Now, whether or not the Senate votes yes or no on this, we don't know. But the House looks like they're trending towards this. And it seems like some Republicans are also kind of saying, you know what, we think he should be impeached too. Now, why do they want to go through this? Impeachment takes a long time. It's not something that happens overnight. It's a slow process because the House will basically have to draw up the articles of impeachment. They'll have to have arguments over it. They'll have to vote. So even if they do vote to impeach, they have to send it to the Senate, and the Senate has to have a trial. And the trial takes a while. Now, are they going to be able to do that by January 20th? No. But what could possibly happen is they could continue the trial into Biden's presidency, because the reason that matters is, let's say Trump is found guilty. If he's found guilty, he loses his pension, he loses his Secret Service detail, he loses basically all the perks that a former president receives. But he also loses the ability to run for elected office again. He would be banned from running for the presidency or anything else, really, because of that process. At least that's how it's written. It's never been done before. So this may be why they're trying to do that, is to permanently eliminate Donald Trump as a candidate for anything, including the presidency in 2024. Bottom line is, some of the members have also been saying censure, which is a nice way of saying don't ever do it again. Censure still kind of puts on Trump's feet the official that, hey, you were part of this. It's a way of saying, hey, you did it. You were responsible, but it doesn't have the same connotation as an impeachment and conviction. And it wouldn't remove him from office. But what it would do is, if, let's say, Trump does try to run for another office or the presidency, it would make it very easy to bring this up and say, hey, you tried to incite an insurrection. If he says, no, I didn't, like, yes, you did. Censure proves that. Like, you basically have to own up to it. The other part of the fallout here was social media. Right after that, Twitter, Facebook, and all these other platforms, Instagram, basically suspended Trump's account, but then they officially just took it down. They just said, we're done. And of course, Twitter has been the main source of, kind of disseminating information that Trump has used as president of the United States. So this is controversial from the standpoint that, he's lost his voice, if you will. And it's his unencumbered voice, of course, because if he gives a speech, then you have people on Fox News and CNN and MSNBC and all these others that are telling you what they heard and what they think he said and what they think he meant. With Twitter, it's just straight up, here's what I think. Okay. Now, Twitter and Facebook said he violated their policies. Now, immediately after that, when they suspended his accounts, people said that's a violation of his First Amendment rights. It's not. The First Amendment literally says Congress shall make no law. Okay, Congress shall make no law. Twitter and Facebook are not government entities. They are private companies. They have every right to run their platform however they see fit. If you violate their terms of service, they have the right to suspend your account. Some of you have had to go to Facebook jail. because you said the wrong thing. Some of you have had your Twitter account, suspended for whatever. And you'd have to read through the terms of service to see what violations are possibly there. But basically what they're saying is you're violating community standards. They basically said that Trump violated community standards and no longer has the right to an account. Twitter also banned other accounts associated with him. They banned the president's account, POTUS, okay, the president of the United States. They banned his campaign Twitter account because they were worried that he would say, "Oh, I can't get on that account. Well, I'll get on this other account and use it." So they basically, anything he does, and it's part of their terms of service too, that if he gets banned and then tries to use a different one, they can ban that one too. So it's really kind of to a person. Parler, which has been widely circulated as the new kind of conservative talk website, kind of the conservative social media, where a lot of people who maybe are, Trump supporters have been moving from things like Facebook and Twitter over to Parler because Parler doesn't have those same community standards. Well, because of that, there were some issues. The FBI basically looked into it and said, you know what, there have been a lot of plans in the works for a raid on the Capitol building on Parler. So there was a issue where, hey, you know what? They're using this platform to actually continue this very violent rhetoric. So they shut down Parler. And again, Parler kind of got shut down because Google, because Apple and other carriers just refused to put it on their store. So you couldn't download the app, you couldn't use it. And so basically Parler started to kind of go away as well. Now they're controversial. That's controversial because that might be, if the FBI is kind of shutting some things down, they could certainly sue and say, hey, our First Amendments are being violated. And they may have it. They may have a case, but this is going to take some time. Twitter and Facebook, though, are saying, hey, look, we are well within our rights to ban him from our platforms. And then, of course, Donald Trump has kind of floated the idea that he might start his own social media platform. We'll see. Okay. Bottom line is, what will happen now? Well, in the immediate, what's going to happen on January 20th, Joe Biden will become the 46th president of the United States. He will take the oath of office. Kamala Harris will become the vice president. Donald Trump will then become a private citizen, as will Mike Pence, for that matter. There will be a transition of government. Now, Donald Trump has said that he will not attend the inauguration. There is going to be heightened security, and the inauguration will be a little less glamorous than it normally is. They are already talking about really scaling it down. Usually an inauguration has, the vice president takes the oath of office first in the Senate chambers. Then the president takes it, usually out on the Capitol steps, in front of the masses. But nothing in the Constitution says that that's how it has to happen. It can happen in any number of ways. Bottom line is, normally you have a big crowd, but because of COVID and because of security concerns, they've already kind of dialed it down. They've already said it's going to be much smaller. They're not going to have an inaugural parade. Usually they have a parade walking down, Pennsylvania Avenue, taking the president, the newly sworn in president, from the Capitol steps to the White House for the first time. That won't happen. Since Donald Trump won't be there, then there won't be the ceremonial. Usually there's a ceremonial meeting between the previous president and the new one at the White House. That will not take place. Lord knows what it's going to look like. And Lord knows when Trump leaves. Trump could leave tonight. He could say, you know what, I'm going to go down to Mar-a-Lago down in Florida and not come back to the White House. But as it stands right now, he's in the White House. Now, will he have to be removed by Congress? Will he have to be removed by Mike Pence? Will he leave on his own accord? What it's going to look like, I don't know. But the bottom line is, folks, what this is really proving is that we need to start learning how to talk. We need to start learning how to interact with respect, with, and more importantly, not just talk, but listen, to be able to converse with each other, because we're not going to get any better as a nation if we continually yell. If we yell platitudes and we yell crazy slogans, and I don't care if you're liberal, conservative, I don't care if you don't really subscribe to a specific political party, you don't get anywhere by yelling at people. You get places by talking, conversing, and learning. So if you have questions, I'm not sure how much you feel comfortable maybe reaching out to certain teachers. You can always write me an email. You can always email me and say, hey, I have concerns about this, or I have questions about this, or can you kind of go a little bit more in detail about this? Bottom line is, folks, I'm all in for more civic education, understanding how the government works, understanding how things happen. And look, if you want to know how elections should look, and you want to know how people should respond to, you know, uh, this type of, you know, oh, the election was too close and there were problems. I want you to reference a woman by the name of Stacey Abrams down in Georgia. Stacey Abrams ran for the governor a few years ago and lost a very close election. And there were a lot of questions as to how the votes were counted and whether or not polling locations were fair or whether or not people were disenfranchised. Instead of yelling and screaming about it, Stacey Abrams devoted herself towards improving the democratic process across the United States, but specifically in Georgia. And because of her efforts, she basically, with her group, pounded the pavement and got people registered to vote and got people interested in politics again. And because of that, Joe Biden, the Democrat, won Georgia, and a Democrat hadn't won Georgia in a long time. The first Democratic senators from Georgia that were African American and Jewish, like I said at the very beginning, they got into the Senate for the first time because of people like Stacey Abrams that rededicated herself towards fixing the problems in the system. Okay. Now, again, there are other people that are doing that. There are other people getting involved, whether they be Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green Party, whatever else. But the only way we're going to get better is if we start talking and we start learning and we start getting better at conversing. So again, if you have questions, please reach out. Otherwise, that's kind of where we're at. Hopefully, it's much calmer this week. Hopefully, we don't have the same fireworks because that was exhausting last week. And hopefully, we can learn to laugh a little bit and learn to get along a little bit better in the future. Again, hope everybody is safe. Hope everybody is healthy. And good luck on the midterms this week.